welcome back. This is Chaden Halfhill. I'm with Silent Rivers, and I'm working together with the Des Moines Arts Festival to create the new curated exhibition, COVID-19. And I'm here today with Bryan David Griffith from Flagstaff, Arizona, and he's one of the artists in the Emerging Horizons exhibition. Emerging Horizons is mounted at the Olson-Larsen Gallery in their new exhibition space south of the gallery. It's a very exciting show. It is a group of 10 artists from the Des Moines Arts Festival. And while we're all sad that the Arts Festival didn't happen, we were able to put the show together, and we're doing a lot to really reinvent the Arts Festival, just like artists are reinventing themselves right now. Let's start with what you were doing today. It's a great place to start because you had the intention of being outside working with your work. I know the rains impeded that a little bit, but I think your work ties so closely to nature and the interrelationship of what's going on naturally and how we exist as well. And as we look at the body of your work over the course of, let's say, the last 10 years, which the show and the work covers, it would be interesting to see what you're up to, and we can then talk a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thanks, Chaden. Today we had the first monsoon rains of the year, which is really exciting for us in the Southwest. June is normally a really dry month in the peak of fire season, so we welcome those rains. It definitely changed my plans for today. I was hoping to take advantage of the low wind and the sun to do a botanical exposure using a technique I developed with natural dyes or incorporating some cyanotype, which is a 19th century photographic process like you see behind me, and you can see there's some leaves and natural materials incorporated into that piece. But with the rain, I had to change my plans. I used it a little bit to create some variation in a wet painting I was working on, just setting it out in the rain and seeing what happened. So I like to work with nature. One thing I've learned about working with natural materials is to always be open and adaptable. So don't stick too close to your plan. And I try to reflect what's actually happening, what nature is doing. And if it's not going according to plan, then I try to listen. It's a conversation between me and the medium. And try to listen to what are some other opportunities that are out there. I've learned in working with natural materials that it's best not to try to bend them to your will and try to control them too tightly. It'll only lead to frustration. It'll only lead to the piece looking very forced. Rather, I try to embrace the limitations of the materials I'm working with and their unique properties and let them do what they do, thrive, create kind of an organic conversation in the piece between me and the medium. So I have an idea, with this painting, for instance, behind me, originally maybe the left side was going to be this kind of an asymmetric thing here. I don't know if you can kind of see it, but, one side, they started out the same blue, but they really needed to be different. And I originally didn't think this one was going to be darker, but as I was toning it with some sumac leaves gathered from outside, which is a tannin and reacts with the iron in the photochemistry there, it really started to go lighter than I had planned. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I should work with that, make this side darker and make this side lighter, even more so. And you kind of see what's working as a piece unfolds. I always have a plan when I start, but that's just a rough guideline. And most of the time, I end up going off script, improvising, and that I found results in a stronger piece than what I could have imagined in my head beforehand.
You talk about the dualism or the dichotomy that exists between nature and humanity, even just dark and light. Philosophically that exists, but then technique, you also work with a technique that allows for you almost give up control, but you're aware of that process. And one of the things that you when you started moving out, you worked earlier work, you had some work with photography and encaustic. You also worked with fire. I mean, these are not just average materials. These are materials and a process within the material that's extremely chemical or heated. And part of the charge for me and the work was your ability to blend or look at things at a conceptual level. And you said this when we talked, that it's less about the technique or less, I mean, not that the technique wasn't important. It was less about your mastery of the material and more about your use of the material to reinforce the concept or to really dig into the meaning behind the work and then find a process that reflects that. And when you talk about that dualism of humanity, you can't help but to embrace the idea that mastery of material is something that is a lifetime, if not multiple lifetimes. If you look at it that way, it's not really about, our journey is less about the mastery and more about the journey. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's correct. I consider myself very much a student and a beginner. And I think that is a place that is a fertile ground to be creatively, because it allows you to experiment and make mistakes and make failures. If I don't have some pieces that I have to tear off the stretchers, then I'm not taking enough risks. You know, to me, art is not about polishing a craft. It's about exploring a new idea and exploring your materials, exploring the land where you live, the season, bringing those all together in something that's new and fresh and that I haven't done before. So throughout my career, you're correct. I've changed mediums, I've changed styles. I've always originated with the concept I'm trying to explore. Whether a lot of that recently is about the relationship between humanity and nature, between art and ecology. And so what are the best materials to convey those ideas with authenticity? And that has resulted in me changing and adapting my styles and medium for each specific project. So the project itself has a cohesive aesthetic. Sometimes it spans multiple media, like my fire project, but there's a monochrome trend. The only color comes from natural materials in that project. So although it spans installation, painting, and sculpture, there's forms that repeat. So each body of work has a cohesive message and a cohesive aesthetic through it. But from project to project, I may start over and be a complete beginner at the beginning of each new project. And to me, that's very exciting artistically.
So when did you make a decision to pivot? Because the show Merging Horizons really grew out of a conversation that I had with a couple artists last year about their own journeys as artists as they matured, major shifts. And as I got to know the different artists selected for the show, they have their body of work evolved often from a major life change. You're unique in the sense that your work, your shifts actually seem to be a little bit more they're more part of the journey. I mean, they're a little bit less about a big event that changes it and more about an exploration or a part of your process of getting into a different medium, because your use of the medium is evolving, whether it be seeds, whether it's fire. You've come in and out of encaustic. You seem to bring some of these threads throughout. You're almost becoming more ephemeral in many ways. But then the more I look at some of the other work, the ephemeral's there throughout. It's just different ways that it's applied. Makes sense? And I'd love to know, and I think the audience would be curious in this idea of emerging horizons, how you make those decisions to what inspires you to go in a direction, and how do you then choose a new body after you've explored an idea?
Yes, a few things. I'll say again that, most of my work, nothing comes entirely wholesale from me, right? So I'm always reacting to the environment in which I live, both the physical environment and what's going on in our society, what's going on in the past with other artists. And so we're always a product of our time. And there is, personal things that have changed. I didn't start out to be an artist. I went to engineering school at the University of Michigan. I worked as a business consultant for a major agribusiness company and several other clients. And I kind of realized that a lot of the problems that we're having environmentally are done not by evil people, but by people like me that are complicit in trying to feed the kids and trying to make the mortgage, but doing things that are ultimately destructive to our environment in order to make those happen. So I resigned and lost everything, lived out of a van. And I had taught myself photography when I was in college and engineering school. I built my own dark room in the basement of the house I lived in. And so I started out in photography, and then I quickly realized that in order to sell enough work as an artist to make a living, I needed to supplement my gallery income and all with art festivals. So I started doing that. Yeah. And then, the problem with art festivals and with any artist, there's a lot of pressure once you kind of figure out what works. So once you have a body of work that people know and recognize that's distinctive and that's commercially successful, to just stay in that lane and plug those things out. There's pressure from galleries to do that, from your customers, from the art fair circuit, which wants you to jury a year ahead of time and show up with the same work.
Yes.
It's extremely difficult to change mediums. And when I do that, I leave some of my audience behind. It is not financially the smart thing to do, but artistically it is vital to constantly be on the edge of new discovery. And so after a while in my work, I felt was becoming a little more stale. I needed to get away from the art festival circuit a bit. I developed the body of photographs that you see there, which were less about photographing a time and space in front of the camera or a subject, and more about sort of a photograph that's drawn from memory, if that makes sense. More like a painting, which is not how you normally think of a photograph. I think of it as a more literal document. So exploring identity, exploring kind of how we construct our characters. And so the images have a dreamy quality of them, but they're definitely ambiguous. They're definitely open interpretation. They're very different than the more literal photography I was doing before. And so I've had, different personal events that influenced that too. And the fire work started, I was actually out at a show on the East Coast, and I got a call from a local curator here that there was a project they got a National Endowment for the Arts grant for called Fires of Change. And I was supposed to join that project as a small group project to study wildfire in the field with scientists for a year, and then develop work for a small group show that was going to travel. It was funded by the NEA. There was a grant that came with it. But I didn't know that if I could step away from my existing show commitments for a year to work on that project. So I told the curator maybe. And then literally a couple of days later, the slide fire in Oak Creek Canyon just south of my house broke out. And I was on the East Coast. And we got an evacuation order. All of my life's work, my negatives, were back in the house in Arizona. And we were on the East Coast. So I had, friends and family going in and pulling stuff out of the house. And it was a really helpless feeling. And so then I called back to curator and said, oh, yes, I'm going to take this project. This is an issue that affects me. I want to learn more about it. I want to be able to do something about it. And it is a tremendous gift as an artist if ever you get the opportunity to work on something that is bigger than yourself. Take it. And that project I ended up not doing photography for it because the ideas I wanted to convey were so abstract about our cultural preconceptions of fire and needing to accept that in this landscape, fires need to happen. They're a natural part of the ecosystem. And if you try to keep them from happening, you're going to get bigger and more destructive fires.
Yeah.
And we need to stop building new development in fire-prone landscapes in what's called the wildland-urban interface, which you see happening all over throughout the West, especially California, here in Arizona, Idaho, because that just makes fires when they occur. They're more likely to occur when they occur, much more likely to cause loss of life and property damage, and much harder to defend. So being involved with that issue, I really realized that people expected me to go and make photographs like I'd done for Arizona highways and magazines like that of wildflowers growing in burn sites and things like that to show the regrowth. But I realized that if you want to challenge a viewer, you can't give them what you did last time and what they're expecting to see. So a really effective art exhibition challenges people to think more deeply. In order to do that, I had to challenge myself. So I wanted to illustrate these more abstract concepts with painting, with installation, bringing these natural materials I found in the woods with scientists into the gallery, and having people connect with this issue on a visceral level. Whenever you're dealing with art that has a political component, or in my case, an environmental component, which I don't think should be political, but it ends up being a political issue, unfortunately.
Yeah.
People come into the gallery with a preconception based on their own ideology. And so in order to get people to open their minds and listen, one thing we can do at Artists that I try to do is connect with people on the visceral sensory level. So before you think about what are the concepts, do I agree with those or not, you walk into the gallery, you smell the burned wood. You smell the cut wood, the leaves, the beeswax. You see the flame, and you respond to that on a visceral, sensual level, which transcends the ideas and symbols that we put around those things. And that is a way that I open my own mind, and hopefully I open my viewer's mind to my work.
The interesting, I wonder how to translate that experience, that controlled environment of the gallery, to the work that you're, and you opened up a whole lot of things to think about, because the arts festival is a marketplace, but it's also a very different context in which to show and exhibit and discuss work. It's much more ubiquitous. People come and go. You can talk about yourself, your work, in a way that you don't have that space in the gallery. But the gallery gives you this framework in which to really tell a narrative, to really dig into the topics that you're referring to. I'd be really interested, because you do both. I mean, not that other artists don't, but I've in talking to you and looking at your statements, your experience within the gallery context and the theoretical work that you're doing, particularly in the study, because I'd agree, an opportunity like that's one of a lifetime. And it's to be able to get out of that pastoral preconceived idea of what regeneration is, in not only in the use of fire and our experience with fire, but also just in the idea of what the outdoor is, what wild is. We have this kind of ideal. This happens in landscape a lot, and particularly in the Midwest, is we think about our relationship with the outdoor and the landscape as it's over here and we're over here and we're looking at it, and you're taking that preconception and shifting it around. We're in it, we're actually part of it, and that dichotomy is always there, that tension. So that kind of exists also in the art between and there's actually a third component of this, which I would really love to hear your position on. I don't know if you've done any public art, but you've got the gallery space, you've got the festival space, which is much more open. Often it's free to public, and you're directly engaging with people. And then you've got the public art space, which also has a lot of preconceptions. I mean, I've been in committees where the committee's idea of what they expected from the sculpture was very different. I actually like how you approach things, because I can't tell you what it's going to look like until I understand the idea and its relationship with the architecture. And the committee wanted to know that I had this pre-idea of what the sculpture would look like before they even chose us. And yet I was trying to come in as an architectural firm. And so, or as part of an architectural firm. And so even the idea of how we bring art in and challenge the public space, and vice versa, how the public space embraces these new ideas, is an ongoing tension. I'm not even sure what the question is. I'm sorry. I usually know where I'm going with it, but it's listening to you have these three different areas that your work really fits into, but in very different ways.
Yes, it is challenging to navigate both of those, or three of them. So I'm working with museum exhibitions, with commercial gallery exhibitions, and with nonprofits and art festivals like the Des Moines Art Festival, where I'm directly selling, and they have different objectives and goals. So kind of tying back into what I said in the beginning, and with the fire project, yes, there's a lot of pressure, because I'm booking museum shows, 2, sometimes 3 years in advance. Festivals 6 months, maybe a year, and there is a lot of pressure from non-artists to have a clear explanation in the museum and curatorial world too. And people expect at the level that I exhibit, the work to tie in, to be timely, to tie into what's happening in our time, be historically relevant. And so that requires a conceptual focus and a clear statement. And people think that they expect you as an artist to have a sort of a deductive process, which means that I have a statement about what I'm going to make, the issues I'm going to explore, this is what the work is going to look like, here it is. That's not how artists really work. When I've worked with scientists before, they are always really curious about how do you come up with these ideas, how does the creative process work? And I say, I don't have a map where I go from A to B to C. Okay, so I go from A, I'm looking for B, and I kind of go up here to get a better view because I just can't find it. And then it's getting late, so I take the bus over to point D, and then I get on the wrong bus to point E, and then I, hitchhike back to point F, and then I get off, and hey, there's point B right there that I was looking for all along. But it's not a linear process. It's just meandering, really inefficient process. But there's no other way to do it. Like, that's just the way you have to do. You have to have the freedom to meander. So art for me is not a deductive process, it's an inductive process. So when I have an artist statement starting out, it's more like a scientist would approach it. This is a hypothesis, here's this idea for a body of work or a painting or a concept. It can be all of those things, or maybe just one to start. This is a hypothesis. And then I go into the field and into my studio, and I create experiments to try to verify that hypothesis. But I don't have a foregone conclusion, because many times I'm wrong. And so like a scientist, you don't want to have too many preconceived ideas. You have an idea, hypothesis, you want to test it, see what's working, seeing what's not, be open to discovery. And that creates a work that is more authentic and is more interesting to me, and just has a greater energy to it. The other thing with a lot of my processes, like fire, like the stain exposures, when I'm dealing with natural materials, I don't have full control over them in a way that I have with a traditional art material like oil painting and a brush. And that lack of control, to me, it's more, it's like working with an animal or another being that you're having a conversation with. There's an energy that comes from that lack of control. So like those fire pieces, even some of these pieces, they're always on the edge of complete and utter failure. With the fire pieces, they're literally on the edge of, if they go wrong, sometimes they light on fire and the piece is ruined. So there's a performance aspect of listening to the material and working with it, you know. And there's an energy that's reflected in the piece as a result of that you can tell that there's something organic and alive going on with it, that is on the edge of spinning out of control. That's really exciting. And I can't get that, at least the way that I work, if I'm making oil painting with a brush or something where I have too much control. It just looks a little stiff,
Yeah.
a little more control. It can be fine, and it's, for some people, they really respond to that. It's a very kind of Apollonian thing, but you have to kind of let in that kind of Dionysian energy of creative fire or life that cannot be fully harnessed and is on the edge of going out of control. And sometimes you have to let it go out of control. But to me, that creates a dynamic feeling to the piece that it's hard to capture any other way. I can tell the difference, when I can also tell the difference when I've thought too hard on a piece and a piece isn't really that good, but I want to keep polishing it until it's acceptable. And at that point, I've worked on it for so long that I think it's good. But then I try to, with a lot of my work, I'll set it aside for a bit, and then I'll come back to it. And more often than not, those pieces that I worked really hard on, I end up throwing away because they're just too contrived. They're too forced. And the ideas that I stumble upon, that I work with, where the piece goes in a slightly new direction, those are oftentimes the pieces that are really alive.
So let's close with a couple thoughts with regards to your new work, because I think that's where, those that see the show, go to the gallery. I encourage everybody to go to Olson-Larsen's website and to kind of dig around, to reach out to the Arts Festival. There's a whole bunch of information at the Moines Arts Festival, because you have what I was going to focus on is kind of ending with Radiant, because you have the uncertainty ahead as the photographic work, which is really kind of that interplay with memory and like you were describing earlier. I think the acoustic helps with, that textural feeling that kind of, it starts to take the photograph into a much more elusive space. But then you got Rethinking Fire. But then, and you alluded to this earlier, you talked about the new work being, when you're in an art festival, you're juring with current work with the hopes that maybe that gets in the show. And I found this with every festival artist, is that Chris Dahlquist had the same thing. She had a new body of work that hasn't even been completed yet, so it doesn't even jury into the exhibition.
Right.
I'm particularly interested in Radiant because it really has there is an authenticity, like you keep using that word authenticity. There's a level of depth that you have in the other images, but it's really starting to it's got aspects of the work that you're doing with smoke, but it's got the encaustic, and it's just got this effect that's really very emotional. How do you see your work evolving now in the last 12 months, and for that matter in the last 6 months, and how do you see the even the isolation and some of the things that are going on contextually at the moment? Because as we look out the horizon of the next 12 months as a continuation, and the economies are changing, so that has to have a major, I'm sure that you're thinking a lot about that, because really virus spread is an organic, it's just as natural as a forest fire. We just want to manage it. And so there's really an interesting tension there too. And as an artist and as somebody who looks at the science of ecology, I imagine that this is maybe something you're thinking about, perhaps not, but it'd be interesting to see how you see this changing or evolving your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge for all artists. Like many of us, I've had everything for 2020 canceled. I'm looking at, no income for 2020, most likely. Maybe things will come up. We had shows canceled. I just had a museum show I've been working on for a year in 2021 that's canceled because
Sorry to hear
the
that.
funding is so uncertain that
Mhm.
that our venues are playing it safe, and we're trying to do what we can as artists. Uh, I try not to worry about it as much as I can. To be honest, it's not actually that much different. I'm really fortunate that I have a home and studio here I can work from. I can make work. Um, Not everyone can do that, and so I consider myself fortunate in that regard. So I try to count my blessings, and I try to think about the larger picture. If I think about my own situation, and it's always precarious, like what a lot of people are going through now, I have a great sympathy for, because it's kind of a lot of what we've been dealing with for years as artists. We never know where a mortgage payment is coming from 6 months out. And sometimes, we have to scrape and sell. I had to sell some equipment, last year and stuff to make it. And it's always a leap of faith, but you have to let it go and make that leap of faith, and trust that if you make the best work you can, keep putting it out there, you'll be able to survive somehow. And for me, it's also going back to, what can I do that is bigger than me, right? So this issue is much bigger than me. How can I help other artists navigate um, the small business loan programs, for example, things like that? Um, Navigate kind of the situation that we're in psychologically. Um, what can I do to get people thinking about these issues? I've been writing songs recently because that's what's coming to me. It doesn't always.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for artists in this time to work, because yes, you have some time and all, but the reality is, the best way to kill your creativity is to think about your business, or to stress out about anything. And so I'm cutting myself some slack. This is a new piece behind me. I'm working on several new pieces, um, but I'm not expecting a whole lot. I need to spend some time with nature, and spend some time talking with friends and family, and being creative. For me, the other thing for a lot of artists, you feel this constant pressure to always be creating and coming up with something new, something inventive, especially as a contemporary artist. Everything you want to do is, people expect it to be original, expect it to be your own style.
Mhm.
Whereas, like, my musician friends, they can do really great and original covers of other people's work. We don't do that in the visual arts. So there's a lot of pressure there to create something new. And so I try to, again, allow myself to be more of a beginner and free to make mistakes, so that there's not a whole lot of pressure to make my work. As far as COVID specifically, I've been revisiting some of those photographic images that I gave you for this show, because those were actually, I started that series kind of at the end of the Great Recession, a bit in response to a couple things that were going on. One is, kind of the decline of photography and on the art festival circuit,
Mhm.
and commercially, editorially, as a viable business, with the advent of digital photography. There's a lot of free content out there. Um, so I was trying to create something that was made with homemade equipment, um, things that were not dependent on other manufacturers, that was very deliberately lo-fi, and that I would have control of indefinitely. But then I was also responding to where I was at, a lot of other artists were at, with questioning why we do what we do. Um, the the kind of the crazy journey that we're on, always having to make these leaps of faith as artists. So in that imagery, there's a lot of isolation, um, and uncertainty and ambiguity of not knowing where you're going to go as an artist. It's a metaphor for the artist journey that we face, because we don't know when things are going to work out or not. In our culture, we're consistently, or more and more, we're being sucked into a virtual existence, which is ultimately divorces us from our connection with our culture, with our family and friends, and with the natural landscape to which we belong. Um, and that, I think, sort of creates an underlying angst. And so the images explore that. And I think that's very relevant. People are feeling that much more acutely now as a result of the coronavirus. But as artists, we've been feeling that as part of our life's journey for a long time. And so those images were made during the uncertainty following the last recession. And I continue to make them now. And I feel, I understand them in a little bit different way now.
That is a nice way to summarize this experience. And frankly, for me, it's a little bit about this journey as artists, as whether we're embedded in the making of art, or in my case, I chose as an artist to build a business around construction, but there's a lot of similarities. But wanting to always be a part of that bigger whole, that bigger thing. That is in part why I like to curate shows for the arts festival, and it's part to help people understand that you can bring artists together and tell even further. You can expand the narrative by bringing work into the context of each other and tell a larger and richer narrative.
The other thing I would encourage people to do is if you have the chance, if you're in the Des Moines area, take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to go in to the gallery in person and see the work, because my kind of work, some of the other artists I know and you really enjoy their work, but what really makes our work sing is that it's with my kind of work especially, it's extremely subtle.
Yep.
It's made to actually change the way I use layered pigments. As your eye acclimates to the piece, you're going to see kind of an expansion of depth that happens. If you stare at that piece for several minutes, there'll be more color, more sense of depth and movement that begin to occur as sort of a sensory phenomenon that happens that's deliberate with my work, that you're not going to be able to get on a screen no matter how high the resolution.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is, I amplify that and echo that throughout this entire conversation, because your work is subtle and it's very hard to express in the photographs.
Part of it, as artists, I can't do what I do without curators, without gallerists, without festival promoters, and certainly not without patrons. So by supporting your community, supporting your local galleries, your local festivals, and your curators, you really support artists like me, and you bring a cultural richness to your community that would not happen otherwise. So thank you to everyone. We're all part of an ecology here that creates art and culture in our communities.
Great point. And let's close with that. So thank you very much, everybody. Bryan, have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
Take care.